Don't let your kin fall to the shadows. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. This is Bront, CatHerder, and we're having fun talking Raid Shadow Legends and working through derping our way through Faction Wars. This is the Shadowkin edition. Shadowkin is one of the newer factions. Originally there were 12 factions started out. The Dwarves were the 13th faction. Shadowkin were the 14th faction. We've already covered the Sylvan Watchers with the 15th faction. There is not yet a 16th faction as of the filming of this video, but we expect to have one sometime soon because it's about that time. Shadowkin was new, or actually when I was starting, and it's an interesting faction. It's got a oriental theme to it, very Japanese-ish, not entirely only Japanese, but definitely very oriental. And it is one of the more difficult factions because of the way the faction is laid out, as well as the boss of the faction. So let's go take a look and see what we've got in the Shadowkins to work with. But first of all, just a reminder on what derping is. Derping is my method of building a team with damage, enhancers, revivers, and protectors. It's all about team comp. You need enough damage to kill your enemies. You need enough enhancements to help kill your enemies and make it do faster. You want revivers to bring you back to life. And then you want protectors to generally try to keep you alive with the heals and the buffs and control. Now, you can certainly do without one of these things, although damage is really hard to deal with it. But you can certainly do it without revivers if you have the right team. You can certainly do it without enhancers if you have the right team. And you can certainly do it without protectors if you have the right team. But for progression, it generally makes sense to aim to build a team that contains all of these, and it makes it much easier to get the 3 stars that you need to clear Faction Wars. So with that, let's go take a look at the rares. As with the newer factions, there's not a lot of rares. In fact, we only have 8 rares here. The rares here are not particularly great. You definitely have Blood Mask, who can do a little bit of damage if you need to. You have Odachi, who can do some protection as far as a block debuffs is concerned. Vagabond's actually a fairly good turn meter assistant and gives you increased attack as well. None of these are particularly great, and honestly, I would probably avoid investing too heavily into any of the rares. If you have to use them, you have to use them for a little while, especially for early on, but there's a lot of really solid epics in this faction, so let's go focus on the epics and take a look at them. All right, so one of the things about Faction Wars is different factions have different strengths. The strength of the Shadowkin is in protection, somewhat in enhancement in speed, because there's a lot of turn meter control, turn meter boosting, turn meter reduction here, and in damage. A lot of these champions hit really hard. In fact, there's several champions I'm just not going to mention that you could certainly build for damage if you need to. But some of the highlights of those, the highlighted damage dealers, you've got Genbo the Dishonored, who is a very, very good arena nuker. He's a little squishy, but he selfs buff. He can kill through unkillable buffs. He can steal increase attacks. He's got a very good kit. He's actually worth building for mid-game arena. He's got some use in 3v3. He can actually be used in classic arena if that's the nuker you've got. Good champ overall. You've got champions like Nagoyo, which I think I pronounced that properly. He is also an excellent damage dealer. He can do some pretty big single target hits. He's got a pretty good AoE hit. He has similar multipliers to Genbo, but Genbo has a better kit overall. Genbo's a better damage dealer, at least in PvP. Nagoyo is probably actually a better PvE damage dealer, certainly an interesting champion worth building. You've got champions like Fenshi, who's actually really good with turn meter control as well as some single target damage, so he can be useful in early Fire Knight teams. Definitely very good here in the Faction Wars as well, possibly. You've got Siren, who does some enhancements as well, gives you some decreased defense. In fact, actually one of the best decreased defense champions in this faction. You've got Tomo, who can give you some enhancements as well. She can do a little bit of damage. Aburo can do decreased defense at an AoE, although it requires some pretty weird conditions to do so. She can hit fairly hard. She's actually pretty good in Hydra. Definitely a usable enhancer and damage dealer in this faction as well. The revivers in this faction are Kinagashi and Sachi. Sachi has a bit of an asterisk by her. Sachi only has a passive revive if she kills a target. The reason I have to mention her is she's only one of 3 people that has any kind of revive in this faction, and the only true straight reviver in this faction is Kinagashi. Kinagashi has a horrible kit as a reviver and a support. She's got an ally attack with a single champion, and she has a turn meter decrease on her A1. The turn meter decrease requires accuracy, so quite often you will ignore that because you don't have the accuracy and you'd rather make sure she's tough. And the ally attack for 1 extra champion, because it's a random champion, you never know who you're going to get. It's not that great. But Kinagashi is the reviver, very good for bringing along to get those final stars, particularly given the boss in this. But that's where the protectors come in. One of the best protectors in the game, even in the Legendaries, is Taragi. Taragi offers ally protection. He has a massive heal when he throws out his protection. He has an provoke on an AoE. He has a decrease attack A1. And when he's hit, he has a chance to throw out poisons, which means he can do a little bit of damage while being hit if you bring the accuracy. And you want the accuracy from the provoke as well. So he gives you control, gives you reduced damage, and then gives you the ally protection as well, which can be huge against this particular boss. Burn-Gary is the other one I like. Burn-Gary can actually smack pretty hard. Burn-Gary has a provoke on his A1, although it's a very low chance. He has a stun on his A2, which is I think a 60-ish% chance when booked. He also puts out strengthen, puts, I believe, increased defense, throws a ton of protection buffs out there, and Burn-Gary also heals himself when you kill enemies or when allies die as well. So he's very tanky, very easy to keep alive. I really like Taragi and Burn-Gary. In fact, they're in my recommended team. Spoilers there. But they're very, very good champions. There are several content creators that are really big on Hotatsu, and I actually liked Hotatsu. I used him on my alt when I had to get through this faction. Hotatsu brings a bunch of healing, some leeches, some decreased attack, decent champion overall. I think I'd rather have Taragi and Burn-Gary, but Hotatsu brings some healing, and healing is something that this faction is lacking in quite a bit as well, so he can be very useful for that. As I mentioned, Tomo has some additional control and enhancement. Fenshi brings the turn meter control. Masamoto has a big AoE decrease attack and turn meter control as well, so he can be a very good protector as well, although I don't think he's particularly well suited for the final boss. Shadowkin Legendaries. There are a lot of them. Most of them are pretty good. There's several limited faction ones, and we also have Lady Mikage. Lady Mikage is the only mythical I'm talking about in this series because Lady Mikage is a fusion. So while it is difficult to get her, it is entirely possible that you might actually get Lady Mikage before you finish Faction Wars and be able to use her in Faction Wars. If you get a Lady Mikage, she does protection, she does damage, she does enhancement, she does everything but revives. She is great. She will help you make Faction Wars super easy. She's well worth building. She's a great champion in almost any area of the game. Will help you beat Faction Wars. So I'm not going to talk about her because if you get her, it should be pretty easy. The other 2 champions I'm not going to talk about too much. Ninja, who is a great damage dealer and control, but he was the first free champion in the game. It's probably still one of the better free champions they've given out in the game. And you really just can't get him anymore, and there's probably no real chance that you ever will get a chance to get him unless you get an account somehow that had him in the first place. It's very unfortunate, but that's where it is. Zenogre Blademaster, a very good champion as well, would be very helpful in this faction if you have her. She was a fusion somewhat recently, but she was part of the Monster Hunter collab, so she is not really readily easily available. We have Jinro the Stork, who is a Doom Tower champion. He's actually terrible. I would not advise using him even if you had him for some reason. But because he's a late Doom Tower hard champion, you're not going to have him. So what champions are you guys possibly likely to have or maybe have access to? Well, as I said, there's a ton of damage here. Jintoro is a pure damage beast. He does a lot of single target damage. He brings some decreased defense and weaken. He brings a lot of turn meter control as well. He is a great champion for clan boss. If you're building him for clan boss, then you're probably going to build him for faction wars as well. Definitely worth building if you've got one there. Michinaki is a great all-around champion. He brings a lot of damage, he brings burns, he brings hex, he brings strip buffs, he brings an awful lot of interesting support. He's also a defense champion, so while he can nuke, he also can take a lot of damage as well. Arima can negate, ignore defense, and so she can help your team tank, although that's not really a problem in Faction Wars. She also hits really hard. She brings provokes. She can hit through weak hits against Demon Spawn. She can help reduce the defense of enemies with one of her abilities. She is a great nuker. She is one of the best arena nukers in the game. Well worth building, and if you build her for just about any content, she will be useful in Faction Wars as well. We've got Tatsu, who can do some decent amount of damage. Tatsu is a fusion champion for Lady Mikaki, so if you pull a Tatsu, feel free to 6-star, 60 her. You don't necessarily have to book her, but she's worth building for Faction Wars because she hits fairly hard. She's got a decent kit for some other support as well. You're going to need her for Mikage. You're going to need to get her to that 6-star 60 as well, so you might as well build her and use her while you've got it. Genzen is a great damage dealer and enhancer. Genzen brings AoE decreased defense. He brings constant attacking. He brings an awful lot of damage. He brings a little bit of turn meter control as well. Genzen is a great champion. Kyoku is a great protector that also can do a lot of damage because she is an ally protector that has block damage when she casts the ally protection skill. So you can build her for damage. She actually hits really hard. She also brings a decreased attack, possibly even burns as well. And she just nullifies the amount of damage that the enemy team does. She has some use in Arena, but in PvE, she's amazing, and she will be a hard carry in this faction. You probably will not actually need a reviver if you have Kyoku built fast enough. Karato, who's a pretty straight damage dealer, but also has some lockout abilities with a block active skills as well. He also partners with Yumiko. If you have Karato and Yumiko, you're cruising in this faction. Riho does a decent amount of damage with a bunch of single target debuffs, but Riho also brings a really, really nice cleanse and is also immune to a couple of debuffs as well. She'll throw them back on the boss or whoever's actually doing to debuff her as well. Riho is a great champion to have, great for support, very useful champion. I wish I had one. So that's the damage dealers, and it's not to say that some of the other champions here don't deal damage, but that's the damage dealers that highlights. You've got a lot of options here in the legendaries. As far as enhancers go, Yumiko is probably one of the best champions in the game, period. She does a skill lockout and a skill reset at the same time. She also has Hex, and that Hex can allow them to throw debuffs back on champions that have been hexed, and that, of course, also adds additional damage as well. Probably, again, one of the best champions in the game, so useful in so many areas of the game. Well worth building, will help you through Faction Wars. Shuzen is one of the newer speed buff champions. She does speed buffs by instantly activating other champions. So basically, she can take her turn and buff another champion and then force them to go immediately rather than have to wait for their turn meter to run off. So she can be a very good champion for this. She comes with a great speed aura. She's a very good enhancement champion, well worth building for this. Lady Kimmy is one of the better enhancers all around for Faction Wars. Lady Kimmy brings a bunch of speed increase, speed decrease, buff strippage, decrease speed, increase speed. She brings an awful lot of speed manipulation. She's one of the queens of speed, if not the queen of speed, as far as just her kit and how focused it is on speed. Very, very good champion, will help you with the Faction Wars. Being able to control the turn meter on the boss is one of the ways you can deal with the boss, so Kimmy's great for that. The only reviver of any kind here in the Legendaries is Gamaran. Gamaran has a passive where every other turn, so it's a one-turn cooldown, if anybody on the team kills somebody, it will revive a fallen ally. He can be useful, and in fact, I had to use him on my team to kill the boss and have somebody revive. So you can get one death on the boss if you have a Gamaran to be able to manage. Overall, his kit's really weird. He does some buff stealing and buff spreading. He does possible heals or possible damage based on one of his skills. Overall, he's not a great legendary. He's weird and he's hard to deal with. I don't hate him because I've used him in some of the Doom Tower waves, and I found he actually is really good in the Doom Tower waves. but he's not better than any other champion his spot most of the time. So you would be using him if you're literally so strapped for revivers that you can't bring a straight reviver, and that's where Kinagashi comes in. So I would not advise building Gamaran, but he does bring some protection and revival to you if you need it. And there's other champions that are generally useful. Jingwan has its uses. He's not a particularly great champion, but he might be helpful. Yoshi brings some increased turn meter stuff, increased speed, increased accuracy, increased attack. He's a decent champion. He's not great, but he's got some use in arena, especially with bomb teams. Noble is bad. Noble's best used, unfortunately, is to +1 Ninja, and Ninja being a limited time just makes the champion bad. Doesn't really help him much at all. But that covers all the legendaries, so let's take a look at the boss. All right, the Shadowkin get lucky. They get the red boss. The red boss is the instant kill, stun everybody, and give true fear on the one champion they're going to hit, and then hit them and try to kill them. So this is where ally protection can be huge. So your Taragi or your Kyoku will help carry this quite a bit, as you do have to time that very properly to make sure that he doesn't actually kill somebody. This is also where turn meter control can be helpful, because normally hitting this boss will boost its turn meter, so it makes it very hard to lock out this team. But if you get decreased speed and you have a bunch of champions that do damage and suck turn meter, like your Jintoros, like your Genzins, like your Kimmies, you can control the turn meter and you can make this boss not take that many turns. And reducing the amount of turns this boss takes is one of the easiest ways to get through this boss without dying much. This is also where champions, as I mentioned, Burn Gary can be very helpful as well, because he can throw Strengthen out. Strengthen is one of the better ways to resist taking damage in addition to the ally protection. And if you can get ally protection and Strengthen out, you'll take almost no damage whatsoever. This boss is difficult, particularly for a faction that does not have a lot of reviving options. You really need to lean on the turn meter control and ally protect to get through this boss. So here are overall my recommendations for what champions you might want to use. As I mentioned, there's a lot of epics that actually do deal a lot of damage, so those are some of the best, but there's several of them. There's a lot of damage in the legendaries. The legendaries are actually all pretty good. Michinaki is great. He even brings a decreased defense. Genzin brings the decreased defense and the turn meter control. Very, very helpful. A lot of damage in this faction as well. Several champions that you'll find in the legendaries that are all over the place. But this is one of the factions where I feel you can actually make a pretty good team with just epics if that's what you're looking for. So I recommend Kinagashi as the reviver. There's really no question about it. I really recommend Taragi. Hopefully you get a Taragi. He is almost indispensable in this team, or at least the way I've got it constructed. The ally protection combined with the revive generally means that you may not even have somebody die on the boss, and if you do have somebody die on the boss, Kinagashi can then pick them up. Then I've got either a Burn Gary or a Hitatsu I would recommend. Burn Gary brings you more control, Burn Gary brings you more protection, and he himself is tankier. Hitatsu brings you a little more healing, so he's still very viable, and you could certainly put him in something like a stun set because he does have an AoE attack, or something like regeneration just to make sure he stays alive to try healing other people. As far as damage is concerned, your epics, the top damage dealers are your Genbo and your Gogoro if you're looking for pure damage. But if you had to substitute out, you could certainly put Burangeri and Hotatsu in instead of a Genbo or a Gogoro. And then finally, for decreased defense, Surian is probably the best option. Oboro is another viable option as well. They'll both do additional damage for you as well. So let's go talk about my team. There's a little bit of a story with that as well. So this is my team that got through Faction Wars. As you see, I've got Ninja, so I cheated, I guess. But it is a strong team. It was not an easy pass. The fact that I had to bring a Gamaran, because at the time I did this, there were no other revivers other than Gamaran or Sachi. So Gamaran was my only option. I had built him actually for content, for a different content creator at the time, but I didn't even have him booked. He was very helpful, and as you can see, he gave a lot of healing on my team, and I actually did need the revive because Genbo did not survive the boss, and then Gamaran revived him. Overall, it was a very difficult boss. I actually didn't beat the boss with 3 stars on my first try. I had to retry repeatedly and stop in order to get this. It took quite a bit of work to get through. As far as needing it for Lydia, I believe I actually had gotten Lydia just before this became a requirement for Lydia specifically. So I had completed Lydia. I didn't need to complete this, fortunately, before I got Lydia. I got it in just under the wire. And the reason I wanted to mention this is if there is a new faction that comes out, because right now it's June to 2024, I'm recording this, and they may announce a new faction sometime in the next 3-6 months. It would not surprise me. If they announce a new faction, they will generally give you 6 months before that faction gets a faction war stage and gets filled out enough to require faction wars. So the good news is, if you're looking at this now and are worried about being under the gun, you've probably got some time before another faction wars comes out. The bad news is that if you're struggling through faction wars and that other faction comes out and you're still not able to beat faction wars, you've got another stage on your hands. Don't worry, I will make another DERP video about that. So hopefully this gives you some help. Until next time, I've been Bront CatHerder.